In the previous 3 instalments, I've told you of many cases of people being prosecuted for owning or using a simple radio scanner. In this 4th and final instalment, I've spent weeks trawling through the archives to bring you some really interesting stories of criminal proceedings brought against scanner users. Most of these involve police radio and cordless and mobile phones, all of which are now digital. And so as the years go by, the number of cases dwindles, but in the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of people were taken to court for this seemingly innocent action. Some of these cases involve other crimes or other reasons for the police to be present, and the radio scanner portion of the story is somewhat secondary, but others recount instances where people have been lifted in the street for merely possessing a radio scanner. An eavesdropper who used an illegal scanner to listen into police radio failed to realise he was being targeted for a drugs bust. Gary Voges of Whitley was arrested in a raid on April 1, 1998. Reading Magistrates Court heard in September 1998. When officers searched his house, they found the illegal scanner pre-tuned to their radio frequencies. Barry Kochanek prosecuting said, one of the officers made a call through his radio and it was transmitted through the scanner. It was obvious the scanner was being used to monitor police messages, which can be of considerable use to anybody involved in a crime. Police also found quantities of cannabis at the house, which Mr. Vogt said was for personal use. Colin Mackrell defending said the scanner was a second-hand device which a friend had. His friend no longer wanted it and passed it on to Mr. Vogt 2 days before the raid. He'd spent those 2 days playing with the scanner and listening to a number of things, which could include other emergency services and mobile phones. It's ironic that although it was tuned to the police frequency, Mr. Vogt did not know the police were coming. He added that the drugs found in the house were valued at a mere £2.50. Mr. Vogt pleaded guilty to charges of possession of both the scanner and the drugs. He was given a 12-month conditional discharge for possession of cannabis, fined £50 for possessing the scanner, and ordered to pay £45 costs. A Wigan landlady who held lock-ins kept a step ahead of the police by scanning their radio messages, a court heard in December 1998. Irene In was eventually found out by undercover officers planted in the railway pub at Pemberton, who saw at first hand how her early warning system worked. Wigan magistrates were told that the 46-year-old licensee, husband Jeffrey, 51, and 24-year-old son Carl were all in on the scam, which saw them regularly serving customers well after time, and once the plainclothed officers were given a drink as late as 2:05 a.m. Prosecuting Mr. Francis McEntee said, while officers were present, a radio scanner was used to warn customers that police were on their way. Mrs. Ince had last year been cautioned about lock-ins, but since then, officers had been baffled to find the Billings Road pub in darkness when further complaints about late-night revelry were made. But the undercover work revealed that on one occasion, when the patrol cars were on their way, the customers were ushered upstairs, and on another, everyone was made to drink up and leave in a hurry. Mr. McEntee said after-hours drinking was endemic. The railway was a known spot. Not only were customers in after hours, but the numbers grew. They also had a system operating. This was a separate business run quite flagrantly in breach of licensing regulations. The officers observed that money taken after 11 p.m. was dealt with separately, and a calculator was used, presumably to avoid after-hours drinks being registered on the till. Irene In pleaded guilty to 5 counts of after-hours serving and 1 count of allowing a 17-year-old to work behind the bar, her husband for using a scanner, and Carl for 2 lock-in charges, using a scanner, and staging live entertainment without a licence. Defending Mr. Mark Owen said the couple had obtained the scanner on holiday in Tenerife in January at the suggestion of another landlord, that the lock-ins had been held to get them out of financial difficulties, but they'd still failed to do so. Irene In had already had her licence revoked at a previous hearing, which would lead to the family losing their business, home and income. She was fined £250 plus £60 costs and given 12 months probation. Her husband was made to pay the same and given 120 hours of community service, and her son received a fine of £200, £60 costs and 12 hours of community service. Police officers searching a Carmarthen house in early 1999 found a radio scanner tuned to receive Dyfed Powys police messages, local magistrates heard. Brad Stevens, 41, of Carmarthen, denied using a scanner with intent to obtain information. Stevens was found guilty, but magistrates adjourned the sentencing until Monday, March the 22nd, when he was due to appear before them charged with possessing cannabis resin. Mr. Tim Hayes for the Crown Prosecution Service said the scanner found on top of the television set was plugged in to receive VHF and UHF channels. He was using it to listen to police channels or was intending to use it to listen to messages, which is against the law, he added. The scanner was examined by Mr. Paul Jones, employed at the Dyfed-Powys Police Headquarters in Llangunna, who found it in working order. It was capable of scanning police messages used in the Carmarthen area. Stevens told the court he'd bought the scanner for £40 in a car boot sale near Newquay. I did not intentionally use it for any wrongful purpose. I have heard ambulances, aeroplanes and taxis on it, but have received no police messages. Stevens said his intention was to use the scanner at football matches and race meetings. Mr. Mike Reed, defending, said Stevens bought the scanner not knowing it was tuned into police frequencies. Although it was tuned into police frequencies, there's no evidence that he used it to listen to police messages. The outcome of the case is unknown. 2 constables were puzzled when they could still hear police messages after turning down their radio sets while in a Melton man's home in a story that was reported in April 1999. Then they spotted a scanner next to a domestic hi-fi system. It was tuned into police frequencies. As a result, Paul Brightwell, 35, was charged under the Wireless Telegraphy Act with listening to police communications without authority. Brightwell pleaded not guilty. He said scanners were widely available and police messages could be picked up by ordinary domestic radio tuners. He admitted he sometimes listened to police messages, but told Melton magistrates, "I can't see how taking me to court is justified. It's ridiculous." The magistrates had some sympathy with him and conditionally discharged him for 6 months. Presiding Magistrate Lawrence Howard said, "These instruments are legal to own, and yet using it to listen in constitutes an offence." But he told Brightwell, who defended himself, it was an offence to merely listen into police frequencies, and the court could do nothing about that. The magistrates declined to confiscate the scanner and told Brightwell he could claim it back from the police station. PC Mario Taboni and PC Spike Yeoman told how they called at Brightwell's home on August 30th, 1998. PC Taboni said, "I was shown into the lounge area, and while talking to Mr. Brightwell, I could hear police communications. I thought it was my colleague's radio. He turned it down, and we could still hear the communications. I turned mine down, and we could still hear, and then I saw the scanner hooked up to the hi-fi unit." The officer challenged Brightwell about it, and he became agitated and threw cushions towards me, he said. An amateur radio buff narrowly escaped a jail term after police and government officials found a sophisticated two-way communication system at his home. George Boot, aged 40, had his Bilston home raided after police complained about interference with their radio system, Wolverhampton magistrates heard in November 1999. At an earlier hearing, the married father of 3 admitted using wireless telegraphy apparatus without a licence, possessing the equipment, and using it to gain information. Lester Maddell, prosecuting for the Radio Communications Agency, said investigators were called after apparently deliberate interference with the police radio system. There was evidence to show that Boot was responsible for the interference. Police and radio agency officials visited Boot's home and found a scanner tuned to pick up civil aviation radios, cordless telephones, business radio links, and the government department's own channels. Mr. Maddell said that they also found a sophisticated base station linked to 20 portable two-way radios, 2 computers with specialist software, and 33 illegal discs to program the sets. The equipment was even able to pick up military radio signals. He said several of the sets had stickers on with his name and address on. Boot said he liked to charge the batteries and watch them run down, but the Radio Communications Agency said that matters went further than that. He admitted he used the handsets to make sure they were working. The presiding magistrate sentenced Boot to some probation, although the report was damaged, so I couldn't see how many, and told him he faced a real risk of being jailed for the offences. He was ordered to pay £750 in costs and to forfeit the equipment. A motorist eavesdropping on a police radio scanner chased an ambulance at speeds of up to 70 miles an hour as it raced to help an elderly woman, a court heard in December 2000. And when police approached Derek Matthews at the scene, an officer was astonished to hear his own voice coming back at him from inside the car. Matthews, 34, of Hook Norton, had been eavesdropping on emergency services communications with a scanner. He tailgated the ambulance as it raced to treat a woman who had collapsed after a stroke in Lower Tadmerton on Friday, March 3, 2000. Matthews did not appear at Banbury Magistrates Court, but pleaded guilty to charges of careless and inconsiderate driving and possession of a scanner. Paul Harrison, prosecuting, said the ambulance had to travel some distance to get to the scene, and the police were also called to protect the scene while the ambulance was on its way. The ambulance passed Mr. Matthews' vehicle as it left Banbury, and Mr. Matthews followed the ambulance. He seemed to be pursuing the ambulance, overtaking the same vehicles that the ambulance was overtaking, sometimes with a restrictive view because the ambulance was in front of him. Mr. Harrison said that Matthews was tailgating the ambulance at speeds of up to 70 miles per hour. He said that at one point he was travelling at 60 in a 40 mile per hour zone. When he arrived in Tadmerton, Matthews was approached by a police officer on the scene. Mr. Harrison said the officer had his personal radio on. He went to speak to Mr. Matthews in the car and could hardly believe his ears when he heard his own voice coming back to him from the scanner Mr. Matthews had in his car. Clearly he'd been listening to the transmissions of the police. The officer asked Matthews to wait until he could speak to him, but he drove off and was later found at home. Mr. Harrison said he told police, "What's the harm? I was listening and heard about the old lady. The ambulance overtook me and I thought I would follow it to look." The prosecution said Mr. Matthews had the scanner, it was programmed in, and he was undoubtedly listening to the police. He said that Matthews had been using the scanner to listen to the police because his brother was in custody for charges for which he'd since been acquitted. Matthews claimed he wanted to know whether the police were looking any further into the case. He was fined £200 for careless driving and a further £200 for possessing a scanner. He was also ordered to pay £150 in costs. A Wolverhampton man admitted using a scanner to intercept police radio messages in October 2001. Mark Bennett, aged 36, of Dunstall, also admitted handling stolen goods. He was warned he faced a community sentence when he appeared before city magistrates. His co-accused, Scott Anthony Costin, aged 19, admitted handling stolen goods. He'd already been found guilty in his absence of driving otherwise than in accordance with a licence and without insurance and a test certificate. Costin was told by Judge Tan Gillespie that he was considering a custodial sentence. Both men were bailed until February the 22nd. The outcome of this case is unknown. Stephen Allen Fry was found guilty at Northampton Magistrates Court in October 2002 of the offence of using a handheld ICOM scanner on February 19, 2002 to listen to radio messages without proper authority. The 24-year-old of Abington was prosecuted under the 1949 Wireless Telegraphy Act and was found guilty following a short trial. He pleaded not guilty, but the magistrate's bench ordered he pay a fine of £100 and £100 in costs and issued an order for the destruction of the radio scanner. A man listened to radio transmissions made by West Midlands Police after buying 2 scanners from a car boot sale. Anthony Baker, aged 40, admitted intercepting or listening to a wireless message after police raided his home and found the equipment in January 2003. Baker of the Scotlands was fined £175 and ordered to pay £70 costs at Wolverhampton Magistrates Court in November 2003. Mr. Martin McNamara for Baker said his client was naive and turned the radio on and listened to what he heard. So that's the final part in this series on people being busted for using radio scanners. As you can see, in some cases the penalties are quite severe. It just goes to show how seriously this was taken years ago. If you are one of the people in this video and are watching by some remote chance, then get in touch. Let me know what you think of these stories, and if you'd like to see the other 3 episodes, then check the links in the description below.